Tobo never imagined that one careless sentence could haunt him for the rest of his life. "You wouldn't fit in there," he told his wife one Friday evening while adjusting his tie. "Those people, they're different." He didn't even look at her when he said it. Nomsa stood quietly by the kitchen counter, stirring a pot of chicken stew that filled their small suburban home with a comforting smell. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply nodded, smiled faintly, and asked if he'd be home before midnight. That was how it had always been. For 15 years. Every year, Tobo's company held elegant corporate dinners, award nights, and end-of-year celebrations. Every year, colleagues arrived with their spouses dressed in their finest clothes, laughing together and posing for photos. Every year, Tobo came alone. Whenever someone asked about his wife, he always had an excuse. "She's not feeling well. She's visiting family. She doesn't enjoy these events." After so many years, people stopped asking. The truth was much uglier. Tobo believed Nomsa wasn't polished enough. She had grown up in a quiet rural village in Limpopo before moving to Johannesburg after finishing school. She preferred simple dresses instead of expensive brands. She spoke softly, never tried to impress anyone, and still greeted elderly people with both hands as a sign of respect. To Tobo, who had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, those things embarrassed him. He convinced himself he was protecting her from judgment. But deep down, he was protecting himself. Ironically, everyone who truly knew Nomsa adored her. Their neighbors often stopped by just to chat with her. Children in the street called her Auntie Nomsa because she somehow remembered every birthday and every small victory in their lives. If someone lost a job, Nomsa quietly cooked meals. If an elderly neighbor needed medicine, she delivered it without expecting thanks. She never posted about her kindness. She simply believed that if God had blessed her with enough, someone else probably needed it more. Tobo admired those qualities in private, but never in public. Whenever he received another invitation to a company event, he'd casually leave it on his desk until Nomsa eventually noticed. "You have another function next week?" she'd ask. "Just work." "Oh. Nothing important." She always smiled. "Drive safely." There was never bitterness in her voice. That somehow made him feel even worse. His younger sister, Zoma, hated the way he treated Nomsa. One Sunday afternoon during a family braai, she finally confronted him. "Bro, why have I never seen Nomsa at any of your work events?" Tobo shrugged while turning the wars on the fire. "She wouldn't enjoy them." Zoma folded her arms. "Did she tell you that?" Silence. "You decided that for her?" "It's complicated." "No," Zoma replied quietly. "You're just ashamed." Those words hit harder than Tobo expected. He laughed them off, but they stayed in his mind for weeks. Still, nothing changed. Life carried on. Promotions came. Salary increases followed. A bigger house. A newer SUV. Expensive watches. Everything Tobo had once dreamed about. Yet every evening, the first thing he noticed when opening the front door wasn't any of those achievements. It was Nomsa waiting with dinner already prepared. She always asked the same question. "How was your day?" And somehow, she genuinely wanted to know. One rainy Tuesday, everything began to unravel. Tobo's company announced that a multinational investment group was considering buying a large share of the business. If the deal went through, many executives would receive life-changing bonuses. The office buzzed with excitement. Rumors spread faster than taxis during rush hour. Some said the investors were from Europe. Others claimed they were backed by one of Africa's wealthiest family businesses. Nobody seemed to know the truth. The CEO only smiled whenever someone asked. You'll meet them soon enough. Preparations for the annual corporate gala became more extravagant than ever. This year's invitation was different. Partners are strongly encouraged to attend. His assistant placed the invitation on his desk. You should definitely bring your wife this time. Thabo forced a smile. We'll see. That evening, Nomsa noticed the gold envelope before he could hide it. She picked it up gently. This one looks important. It is. They want spouses to come. He hesitated. They suggested it. She looked at the invitation for a few seconds before placing it back exactly where she'd found it. If you'd rather go alone, it's okay. No anger. No disappointment. Just kindness. For reasons he couldn't explain, that hurt more than any argument ever could. Later that night, unable to sleep, Thabo wandered into the garage looking for an old toolbox. Instead, he found a dusty storage box filled with documents from years ago. Old lease agreements. Wedding photos. Medical records. And tucked between two faded folders. A thick cream-colored envelope. It wasn't addressed to him. It was addressed to Nomsa. The envelope had never been opened. Across the front, stamped in bold letters, were the words. Confidential, to be opened by Nomsa Dlamini only. Below that was the logo of one of the most powerful private investment groups in Southern Africa. Thabo frowned. He had seen that logo before. Not at home. Not on television. But somewhere much more recent. His heartbeat quickened. He reached for his phone, opened the email announcing the arrival of the mysterious investors. And froze. It was the exact same logo. The same company. The same family. Suddenly, 15 years of assumptions about his quiet, humble wife no longer made any sense. And for the first time since their marriage, Thabo realized he had absolutely no idea who Nomsa really was. Thabo stared at the envelope as though it might explain itself if he looked hard enough. His hands felt strangely heavy. He turned it over. The seal was untouched. Whatever was inside had remained hidden for years. His first instinct was to open it. His second stopped him. Nomsa had always respected his privacy. She had never once gone through his phone, opened his mail, or questioned the late nights he blamed on work. If he broke that trust now, he would become the very person he always claimed he wasn't. He slipped the envelope back into the box. But sleep never came. The next morning, Nomsa was already in the garden before sunrise, watering the small vegetable patch she'd insisted on planting when they moved into the suburbs. Morning, she smiled. You were up early. I couldn't sleep. She studied his face for a moment. You've got something on your mind. Thabo almost asked her about the envelope. Instead, he forced a laugh. Just work. She nodded. I hope today is kinder to you. Not good luck. Not don't worry. I hope today is kinder to you. She always had a way of saying things differently. At the office, nobody was working. Everyone was gossiping. The investors have landed. I heard they're staying in Sandton. My cousin says they're billionaires. They're choosing who stays and who goes. By lunchtime, panic had quietly replaced excitement. A buyout usually meant restructuring. Restructuring meant jobs. Even senior managers weren't safe. Thabo tried focusing on spreadsheets, but his mind kept drifting back to the unopened envelope. Who was Nomsa? Why would a private investment group be writing confidential letters to her? And why had she never mentioned it? That afternoon, the executive team received another email. Mandatory meeting. Tomorrow. Everyone. Including spouses. The CEO added one unusual sentence. Some of our guests place great value on family. That line puzzled everyone. Since when did investors care about employees' husbands and wives? Back home, Nomsa had made beef stew with steamed bread, Tobo's favorite. Normally he'd compliment her cooking before taking the first bite. Tonight, he barely touched it. She noticed. You really are worried. He looked up. Nomsa. Yes. If there was something important about your past. She smiled softly. We all have a past. Would you tell me? Her smile faded, but not because she seemed offended. It was almost as if she'd expected that question one day. When you're ready to ask the right question, I'll answer it. Those words landed like a stone. What does that mean? She stood up and carried the empty bowls to the sink. You'll understand. Nothing more. The following evening, the annual gala transformed one of Johannesburg's most luxurious hotels into a sea of black suits and evening gowns. Crystal chandeliers reflected against polished marble floors. Waiters moved silently through the crowd. Executives laughed a little louder than usual, each hoping to impress the mysterious guests. Tobo arrived alone. Again. As he stepped inside, several colleagues exchanged familiar looks. Still flying solo? One joked. Another chuckled. Your wife finally gave up on these events. Tobo forced a smile. She's happier at home. For the first time, saying those words made him feel ashamed instead of relieved. Across the room, his friend and fellow manager Brandon nudged him. You know, my wife always says your Nomsa sounds amazing. Tobo blinked. What do you mean? My wife volunteers at a community kitchen. So? Apparently your wife has been funding it for years. Tobo frowned. Funding it? Yeah. That can't be right. Brandon looked confused. She never told you? No. My wife says Auntie Nomsa pays the rent, school uniforms for some kids, even medical bills for pensioners. Tobo laughed nervously. You're mistaken. Brandon didn't laugh back. I'm not. The ballroom doors opened. Every conversation stopped. The CEO walked in, followed by several elegantly dressed men and women. The room erupted into polite applause. The board welcomes our partners. Everyone stood. The CEO began introducing each executive one by one. Finally, he smiled toward the entrance. And now, I'd like to introduce the woman whose family has quietly transformed communities across Southern Africa for over 3 generations. People leaned forward. Our chairperson. Silence filled the room. But no one entered. The CEO glanced toward the doors, appearing slightly confused. One assistant hurried over and whispered something into his ear. The CEO's expression changed completely. He smiled. Oh. It seems our chairperson has decided to make a rather unexpected entrance. Confused murmurs spread through the crowd. Tobo checked his watch. Where was this woman? Then, the ballroom doors opened once more. Every head turned. Tobo looked casually toward the entrance. And his entire world seemed to stop. Walking through those doors, dressed in an elegant navy blue gown, was Nomsa. She wasn't alone. 2 of the world's most respected business leaders walked a step behind her, not in front. Behind her. The CEO straightened his jacket, walked down the stage himself, and greeted her with unmistakable respect. Then, in front of hundreds of stunned guests, he said words that made Tobo's knees feel weak. Welcome home, Ms. Nomsa Dlamini. We've all been waiting for you. The room broke into applause. Tobo couldn't clap. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't even understand what he was seeing. Because the quiet woman he'd hidden from the world for 15 years had just walked into the room as the most important person in it. Thabo remained frozen while the applause echoed through the ballroom. Around him, people were smiling, whispering, and craning their necks for a better look. He heard fragments of conversations. "That's her. I've only ever seen photos. I didn't know she lived such a private life. She's even more humble than people said." None of it made sense. His wife, his Nomsa, the woman who still clipped grocery coupons and insisted on fixing torn curtains instead of replacing them, was being welcomed like royalty. Nomsa stepped onto the stage with calm confidence. There was no arrogance in her posture, no dramatic entrance, no attempt to impress anyone. She simply belonged there. The CEO handed her the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said warmly, "before we discuss business, I'd like to thank the woman whose vision made this partnership possible." The room erupted into applause again. Nomsa waited patiently for the noise to settle. Then she smiled. "Good evening, everyone." Her voice was exactly the same voice Thabo heard every morning over breakfast. Gentle. Steady. Warm. "I know many of you expected someone louder." The audience laughed. "My late grandfather taught me that when a tree is full of fruit, its branches bend lower. Success should make us more humble, not more important." The room fell silent. Even the waiters stopped moving. For the next 10 minutes, Nomsa spoke about something Thabo had never heard her mention. She talked about building businesses that created jobs instead of chasing headlines. She spoke about investing in forgotten communities, helping young entrepreneurs, and ensuring that wealth reached families who had never imagined owning a business. She quoted African proverbs with ease. She answered complex financial questions without looking at a single note. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had spent years leading boardrooms. The executives around Thabo nodded with admiration. One quietly whispered, "Brilliant." Another simply said, "Now I understand why everyone respects her." Thabo felt sick. Who had he been married to all these years? Or perhaps the better question was, who had he never bothered to know? When the presentation ended, guests lined up to greet Nomsa. Government officials, CEOs, business owners, community leaders. Each waited patiently for a moment with her. Thabo watched from a distance. Nobody pushed. Nobody demanded attention. Everyone treated her with genuine respect. Not because of fear. Because she had earned it. As she greeted an elderly man in a wheelchair, she bent down to hug him first. She remembered his grandchildren's names. She asked about his health. She laughed at one of his old jokes. The man wiped away tears before she walked on. Thabo noticed something unsettling. Nomsa wasn't pretending to know these people. She truly knew them. "Thabo." He turned. It was Brandon. His face was pale. "You never told us." I didn't know." Brandon stared at him. "You didn't know your own wife?" Thabo couldn't answer. Several colleagues gathered nearby. The same people who had joked about Nomsa for years. One woman looked genuinely horrified. "Oh my goodness. That's your wife?" Another manager shook his head. "She donated a 20 million to our education foundation last year." Someone else added quietly, "My daughter studies because of her scholarship." Every sentence felt like another weight landing on Thabo's chest. For 15 years, he had measured Nomsa by dresses, accents, and dinner conversations. The rest of the world had measured her by lives changed. Finally, their eyes met across the ballroom. Nomsa smiled. The same small smile she'd always given him. No anger. No embarrassment. No desire to humiliate him. She simply walked toward him. People instinctively stepped aside to let her pass. When she reached him, she looked into his eyes with quiet affection. "Hello, Tobo." He struggled to speak. You look handsome tonight." He lowered his head. "Nomsa. You must have many questions. I don't understand any of this." "I know. Why didn't you tell me?" She looked around the ballroom before answering. "Because you never asked." The words weren't cruel. They were simply true. She gently took his hand. "Come with me." They slipped away from the crowd onto a quiet terrace overlooking the city lights. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Johannesburg glittered beneath the night sky. Finally, Tobo whispered, "Who are you?" Nomsa smiled sadly. "I'm still the woman who reminds you to take your lunch." She paused. "The woman who waits for you when you work late. The woman who prays for you every morning before you wake up. Nothing about that has changed." He shook his head. "No. I mean this." She understood. "My family owns several investment companies. After my grandfather passed away, I inherited a large share." "You inherited?" She nodded. "But wealth wasn't something we celebrated. My grandmother used to say, money should introduce opportunities, not introduce you. So I chair the family foundation. I oversee our investments. I travel more than you realize." Tobo remembered every girls' weekend and every community conference she'd attended over the years. He had never once asked what she actually did. Not once. "That envelope." Nomsa looked at him immediately. "You found it. You knew. I wondered when you would. Why didn't you open it?" "I wanted to. But it wasn't mine." For the first time that evening, genuine pride appeared in Nomsa's eyes. "Thank you." He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." She gently squeezed his hand. "For what?" "Everything. For every invitation he hid. Every excuse. Every lie. Every moment he made her feel small." But the words wouldn't come. Just then, the terrace door opened. An elderly woman with silver hair stepped outside. The moment Nomsa saw her, she smiled warmly. Go. The elderly woman hugged her tightly before turning to Tobo. "So, you're the famous husband." Tobo forced a nervous smile. The woman studied him carefully. Then her expression became serious. "I've wanted to meet you for a very long time." Something about her tone made Tobo uneasy. She wasn't angry. She sounded disappointed. She reached into her handbag and removed a neatly folded bundle of letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. "I think these belong to you." Tobo frowned. "What are they?" The elderly woman looked at Nomsa before answering. "They're every letter Nomsa wrote to you, but never had the courage to give you." Tobo's heart skipped a beat. There were dozens of them. Some old. Some recent. All carefully preserved. He reached out with trembling hands. The first envelope was dated just 3 months after their wedding. And written across the front, in Nomsa's unmistakable handwriting, were 7 words that shattered him before he had even opened it. "The day I realized my husband was ashamed of me." Tobo stood perfectly still, the bundle of letters trembling in his hands. The chatter from the ballroom faded into the background. It no longer mattered. The applause. The investors. The executives. None of it mattered. Only those letters did. He looked at Nomsa. She didn't stop him. She simply nodded. "If you're ready, read them." The first letter was only a single page. "My dearest Tobo. Today your company invited spouses to a small dinner. You told me those events weren't really for people like me. I smiled because I didn't want you to feel guilty. But tonight, while folding your suit, I wondered if you were embarrassed by my accent, or by me. I prayed that one day you would see me the way God sees me, not for what I wear, but for who I am. Tomorrow morning I'll still make your lunch. I'll still ask how your day went. Because love isn't only easy when you're appreciated. Tobo's vision blurred. He opened another. Then another. Each letter marked a painful moment in their marriage. The year he received a promotion but celebrated alone. The Christmas party where everyone brought their partners. The award ceremony she secretly watched online after he told her not to come. Not once did she write with bitterness. Not once did she insult him. Every page ended the same way. I'm still praying for us. By the time he reached the final letter, tears were running freely down his face. It had been written only 2 weeks earlier. If he ever discovers who I really am, I hope he doesn't feel ashamed of himself. I don't want revenge. I don't want him to suffer. I only hope he finally understands that a person's value has never been measured by status. If that day comes, I forgive him before he even asks. Tobo couldn't read another word. He covered his face and sobbed. For 15 years, he had believed he was protecting his image. Instead, he had been slowly breaking the heart of the one person who never stopped believing in him. Nomsa gently placed her hand on his shoulder. You don't owe me an explanation tonight. But I owe you one, Tobo whispered. No. You owe yourself a change. Those words cut deeper than any accusation ever could. A few days later, Tobo made the most difficult decision of his life. He requested to speak at the company's monthly leadership meeting. The conference room was packed. Managers expected another business presentation. Instead, Tobo walked to the front with no slides and no prepared speech. He took a deep breath. I've spent years teaching teams about leadership. He paused. But I failed at leading in my own home. The room fell silent. I judged the woman who loved me most because I cared too much about appearances. He didn't mention Nomsa's wealth. He didn't mention her companies. That wasn't the point. I thought success meant being accepted by important people. He looked around the room. Then I realized the most important person in my life had been standing beside me all along, and I never truly saw her. Some people lowered their heads. Others quietly wiped away tears. That speech spread far beyond the company. Not because it exposed a billionaire, but because it exposed an ordinary human weakness that many people recognized in themselves. Months passed. For the first time in 15 years, Tobo and Nomsa attended a company event together. There were no grand announcements. No dramatic introductions. They walked in holding hands. When colleagues greeted Nomsa, Tobo didn't step ahead of her. He stepped aside with quiet pride. This is my wife, Nomsa. Nothing more. Nothing less. It was the first time he had ever said those words without fear. Their marriage didn't become perfect overnight. Trust, once cracked, takes time to heal. There were difficult conversations. Long evenings filled with honesty. Moments of silence. Moments of tears. But there were also moments of laughter. Morning coffee together. Weekend walks through the neighborhood. Simple dinners where neither of them pretended to be someone they weren't. Slowly, they built a new marriage, not on appearances, but on truth. One Sunday afternoon, as they visited the same community kitchen Nomsa had quietly supported for years, a young volunteer asked Tobo. So, when did you realize your wife was such an incredible woman? Tobo smiled. I made the mistake of thinking I discovered her at a corporate gala. He looked across the room as Nomsa laughed with a group of children. The truth is, She had been extraordinary from the day I met her. I was just too blind to notice. Years later, when people spoke about Nomsa Dlamini, they mentioned her businesses, her generosity, and the thousands of lives she had changed. But whenever anyone asked Tobo what made his wife remarkable, he never talked about her wealth. He smiled and gave the same answer every time. The richest thing about my wife was never her bank account. It was her heart. And that was the treasure he had almost lost forever. Moral: never judge the people who walk beside you by what the world can see. True worth is revealed through character, kindness, and humility, not titles, money, or appearances. Sometimes, the greatest blessing in your life is the one you've been overlooking all along.